Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Speak Up Africa, a platform where it gives voice to the voiceless and brings the youth into the conversation on what really matters. And today, I'm joined by two guests, although one is coming back, to discuss the higher education model, which is an issue that I feel has been slept upon and not a lot of people are talking about it. Everyone is focused on the finance bill, and I'm sure everyone watched the conversation that happened yesterday. And so I'd like for this issue to be given the platform that it deserves. And this issue is something that's not really known, not a lot of people know it. And it's good for the students and the youth to give their opinions on them. So I'd like to introduce for my panelists to introduce themselves uh, as we wait for the other panelists. I'd like to give my good friend Fadhili a chance, maybe to introduce himself.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I trust you're well. My name is Fadhili Manyasa Rajab. I am a finalist year student at Kenyatta University School of Law. And yes, I serve as the chairperson of the Students' Council, and I'm glad to be here today. I hope that it will be a fruitful conversation and that we'll be able to deliberate more on the solutions, to these legislations that are actually being put into place and schemes that are actually being put into place to ensure that higher education is more accessible, more transparent and fair to all constituents, or rather people who consume the same. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to a positive conversation.
Thank you for that, Fadhili, and thank you for honoring the invitation to join this important conversation. And next, I'd like to invite the next panelist, also my good friend, Pauline, and take it away.
Clickable unmute microphone button.
Hi Eric, how are you? And hi everyone. Hi our audience. Hi Fadili. So yeah, my name is Pauline Rongo. I have currently finished my third year, and I'm going to my fourth year. I was actually invited by Eric to this discussion about the new higher education funding model. I'd love that you guys take part with us so that we can up like we can discuss and we can talk about this discussion in brief and also in depth. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Pauline, sorry. And I'm your host, Eric Njoroge. I'm also a finalist here pursuing law degree at KU. And I'd like to thank the panelists again for joining us in this important conversation. And also, I'd like to thank the audience that are tuning in and also those who are going to join us for this fruitful conversation. So, as I stated, that this issue is not well known. So, for this discussion, I'd like first to give the context and the background to the issue at hand. So, recently, actually in the month of March, the government issued a new funding model for higher education. And this is a step from the current model. It's different. How is it different? Currently, government is offering scholarships to everybody, non-discriminatory, uh, at 80%. So the government pays 80% of your fee, university fee or TVET fee, or yeah, for the universities. But under this new model that is being proposed, uh, the government is uh, categorizing students according to their need. So there are four categories. There is the vulnerable, where government is proposing to fund them 100%. There's also the extremely needy persons, and also government is offering to fund them 100%. Then the next category is the needy students, and here government is offering to sponsor them only half, so 53%. And the last category is on the abled or the less needy. And here government is offering to offer a scholarship of 38%. So this means the other percentage, they are going to be born either from the household itself or an option that you take help to cater for the rest of the fee. And to put this into context, I'm going to give you a real life example of how this will work. So let's take like a student pursuing Bachelor of Education at Kisii University. The fee is 283,135 shillings. So for the vulnerable, government, for the government scholarship, they're willing to pay 232,171,000. Then these students will have the option of taking help, which is the Higher Education Loans Board fund, at 50,964. This means that the family will pay zero shillings. For the extremely needy, government is willing to pay 199,594 as a scholarship. Then they'll have access to only 84,940. And again, for the extremely needy, the family will not pay a dime. For the needy students, government will pay 150,000. Then they'll have access to 113,254. And then the family will be left with 19,820. And for the less needy, uh, government is willing to pay 107,000. They'll have access to 155,000. And the family will also pay around 20,000. But there's a caveat to this, because the loan help, from everybody will have to repay the loan. So the question is, and this is why I like to bring the panel in. The question is this a fair model? And what are your opinions on it? Let me start with Fadili.
Thank you so much, Eric, for that breakdown. I think it gives a clear outline of what exactly the model is about. And there's this one quote that I normally like to use. I say it a couple of times. It states that nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test man's ability, give him power. And I think the government is trying to look at that and applying it as a doctrine. Now, I think I will start with the positives, because I think that the model is a two-edged sword. It has a positive, but it also has some negatives. Now, when you look at the categorization that was there, among the people who are listed as the vulnerable, which is the very first category, we get that they have given priority to persons living with disabilities. And I think that is something that is commendable, because very many institutions in the country are actually not disability friendly, you know. So when that consideration is given to persons living with disabilities, I think we'll see a rise in the number of people who access education, equally who are living with a form of disability or the other. Now, and I think it also applies to some provision of the, I'm sure some of us know that underway as we're talking right now, there's a HELB Amendment Act, HELB Amendment Bill of 2023. And among the very first amendments, the few amendments that have been proposed by the bill is on the definition of persons living with disabilities. And when you look at the definition at section 2, it has listed persons living with disabilities and what actually entails a person living with disabilities. So it also gives priority to persons living with disabilities. So it is my opinion that for persons living with disabilities, this scheme will be of benefit to them, because we are trying to look at equality towards the access of proper education. But otherwise, I think there are so many loopholes, and I think this is a model that should have taken time to implement, and it shouldn't be a rash decision, because now when you touch on education, which is a sensitive sector of our economy, actually, you risk losing a nation, because education is the tool to the betterment of any nation. You've talked of the vulnerable people. What people I think need to understand is that this 100% funding that was prompted by the government isn't actually going to be listed to be granted as a grant. 80% of this money will be channeled as scholarships, and 20% of this money will be channeled as loans. So even the vulnerable people at some point in life will have to pay the 20%. So this 100% that the government is fronting as support to the vulnerable people in the society is not coming as a grant. So people need to look at it as also a liability, rather it being an asset. So when you look at the second categorization that you mentioned, the people who are less vulnerable, when you actually break it down again, you'll find that the government will be able to only provide 93% of their 100% that they have proposed in the model. How exactly is the government going to do this? You have mentioned the 53% scholarships. So the government will be able to push forward 53% scholarships to these people who are considered less vulnerable, and the other 40%, now to make up the 93%, will be there in form of loans. So you see, if you are less vulnerable, you'll be again at the stage of, at some point in life, you'll have to repay your loans. Now, when you look at the third categorization that you mentioned, who the people who are now needy, they will have to pay a bigger share. And I think the fourth categorization is something that we really need to look at, the people who the government consider less needy or the able in society. Now, these people will pay up to 38% of their own, the government will give them 38% of scholarships, and they'll have to cater for 55% of loans. Now, the other 7% will again be paid by them. So when you look at it, it in a way undermines the provision of fair education. Now, the main objectives for the bringing forward of this model, as the president has said several times in his speeches, and the Minister for Education, Mr. Ezekiel Machogu, that they wanted the model to promote equality, fairness, and transparency in accessing education. And I agree that indeed there needs to be equality in education, there needs to be transparency, there needs to be fairness. But in a way, I don't know if I'm speaking too much. I don't know. Do I have a time limit so that I work with it?
You
Okay.
can go on. It's a very
Okay.
good discussion. Just continue.
Okay, when you look at even our constitution, the very basic Article 10, it provides for national values and principles of governance. And you look at these qualities that the government has listed, accountability, transparency, equity, equality, all those are found there enshrined as fundamental national values and principles of governance. And that is what basically the government is trying to promote. But controversy arises because now it is my humble opinion that this thing should have taken longer. Public participation, expert opinion. I'm aware that the government formulated a committee per se, spearheaded by David Ndii, to look into this matter, but the time limit that was there was so little. Like, it needs to be, this isn't a decision that needs to be hastened. And now we have talked about the university funding model. We haven't even exactly looked at TVET institutions. Now, before this model was proposed, the government has been using block funding, right? We know that the government has been using block funding. And I think one of the fundamental distinctions between that model and the existing model is that it will be not, this new model will be centered on so much on the student, because the funding will be channeled so much to the student rather than it being channeled to the institution itself. And the government looks at it as a measure of promoting efficiency in how these funds will be managed by the school. They're trying to clear the debt that is there and all those controversies that arise. But it is a very, very, very risky situation. The end result will be that many people will not be able to access proper education. And I think the question that many Kenyans have by now is, what mechanisms has the government put in place to categorize these people? One, people as persons as vulnerable, people as less needy. Are there institutional mechanisms? Who are these people who will be assessing these people according to their level of need. And I think this can be, we can copy from what Equity has always done. We all know of the Equity Wings to Fly program. I think it's Wings to Fly program. I think what they normally do is render a questionnaire or something of that sort, and you apply from there. But okay, later on, some of them normally come to inspect the premises where the person lives and all. But are we able to have such a mechanism at a national level? Is it possible for us to do that to 173,000 students?
Okay, I'm gonna cut you short a bit because we are gonna discuss about uh, how the government seeks to implement this funding model. But before we go any further, I'd like to invite Pauline and ask her, is this good discrimination, the funding model? What are your opinions?
Main landmark clickable unmute microphone button.
Hi, Fadili. Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for the question. So, what I can actually say, I agree and also disagree with some of the opinions that Fadili has put out. However, in my opinion, we can deem it as a term of like good discrimination, in that in this new funding model, the government tries or has tried to implement some of the measures that will lead to the principles, the national values and principles. So on my end, where we have this four categorization of having the vulnerable, the less needy, the needy, and also the extremely needy. The categorization the government has put is that the two, the first upper hand, which is the vulnerable, and also the extremely needy, to have 100% inclusivity and also to be catered for 100%, while the others, the less needy and the needy, to be catered for 93%. If you look at how previously this funding model was occurring, it was more or less discriminatory, and also I can deem it like it had the aspect of exclusion. But now with this new funding model, there's this aspect of inclusion, inclusivity for like everyone, and also there is the aspect of having less discrimination. And I'll point across something that Fadili had said. Yes, there's this new amendment bill, the Higher Education Loans Amendment Bill. And in the bill, what they have proposed is to the inclusivity of the vulnerable and also the inclusivity of the persons with disabilities and also the youth. Now, if you look into the definitions and also if you look at what the aim and what the bill is proposed to do, is that it has this aspect of including the three categories. And by doing so, I think what this new funding project will be doing will be leading to a kind of good discrimination rather. And also, okay, yeah, there might be a few challenges, but also let me take you to what the government proposes as their criteria for dispersing this kind of fund. Is that number one, they'll try to look at the social background of the person. They'll also try to look at the family background. They'll also try to look at the schools previously and many other aspects. So it won't be on a basis of just like maybe questionnaires or an interview. It will be a criteria that will be well established, and it will be well catered for, so that money will go, or the funding will go to the people who deserve it and not to the people who don't deserve it.
Thank you for that answer. And touching on that and continuing this conversation, I'd like to ask both of you, starting with Fadhili. We all saw the conversation that was there yesterday Enroll Media Services, Citizen, Inoro on the finance bill and the controversial finance bill. In this economy right now, can we afford to label people into groups? Because as we see, even the middle income earner, is he really able to pay the fee? So I'd like to ask, uh, this funding model, is it fair on the middle income earners or middle income families? And I'll start with Fadili.
Thank you for that. I don't know. From my end, my video is hanging. I don't know if it's hanging on your end as well. But anyway, to answer your question, I think for middle income earners, this would be hectic for them to actually finance their finance education. Now, what the government is trying to do is to clear the universities from shackles of debt and all that. But what the government has not done is look into or put into perspective the people who actually are consumers of this education. When the government was bringing this into place, they were looking at the university, they were looking at the TVETS. They were not looking at the individual people or the individual parents who are actually financing education. And right now, as I said earlier, it is very difficult to tell who earns what, because if it's a matter of declaring your position economically, I think it's a difficult thing to do right now, because what will happen is that of the 173,000 applicants, about 150,000 people will apply as vulnerable people. That is what is going to happen, right? So we can't be able to ascertain who exactly falls into which bracket. Now you can imagine a situation where a person is vulnerable, but then he has been listed by the government as able. Now this person will be unable to cater for his tuition fees. This is a person who previously was entitled to get 80% of university funding, but right now this person will be getting 38%. This is so far-fetched in terms of achieving quality education. And I'm sure in a system like this, with no institutional, that's why I was emphasizing on institutional mechanisms. If there are no proper institutional mechanisms to ascertain who falls under which bracket, it would be very difficult for the government to implement this, and it would lead to mass discrimination in terms of people accessing education. I think the people who will benefit the most, which is okay, are persons living with disabilities, because most of them will be placed under the vulnerable bracket. But now what happens to these other people who have genuinely declared their, and for what sake? I mean, there are so many people even out here who don't know how to use technology. These people who are vulnerable, there's someone out there who has studied in some rural setup. This person isn't even well conversant with how the system works, with how technology exactly works. So the basic information that they have on technology may even limit them from applying, from applying to be in a specific bracket. And I think this is something that will need so many follow-ups. So when we take this model and put it into practice, it will lead to so many victims. And I think it will lead to even a greater fallout in the universities, because there will be less people funding the universities, and there'll be less people accessing education. So I think it's something that should be relooked at, and given and given so much public attention, so that people can be able to air out their views and expert opinion. And it should be something that should take time. Like on my end, I think it's something that should be on the minimum. It's something that should be implemented in like 1.5 years. I mean, look at something like the what is this bill that was prompted by CJ Koome, the Sexual Offences Act. When it was a bill, it took a lot of time to be implemented. So I think the same thing should be implemented here, so that people have the chance to understand how exactly this model works and give out their public opinion, and experts give out their expert opinion. Otherwise, we are going to experience a very big fallout in the education sector.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. And to Pauline, I'll ask the same question, because in the current system that we have, the financial system that we have, government supports everybody at 80%. It pays 80% of your fee. But under the new model, they'll, for middle income, because I believe the majority are in that category, you'll find a hike in the fee. Is that something that ordinary Kenyans can afford right now? Or do you think there was a better way that government could have gone with this?
Okay, thank you so much, Eric, for that. So there are a lot of controversies, or there are a lot of aspects that we tend to bring into this question. So first of all, I'll start off by saying, in my view, I feel this new higher education funding model is of more beneficial, especially in terms of bringing the aspect of inclusivity. Now, what happens? I'll take you back in 2015, whereby the government implemented under the education system to have the cutoff point at C+. So, meaning majority of the people who are doing their KCSE and have attained a grade of C plus are transitioned from the KCSE to now the higher education system. And by this virtue, they're actually going to be catered for by the government. And if you check in the new funding model, in the new education funding model, their aim is to have to propose having like a balance. They want to strike a balance to have this the government to remove like most of the burden from the government to actually having it from the government and the universities, and by so it will actually be of benefit, especially to the public governments, where they will have to try and offer like the same services as private universities. Because one of the more proposals of this new funding model is that they remove the shift from funding the private universities and into funding the public universities. And by doing so, they're actually going to benefit and going to help the public universities. Now, coming back to your question, coming back on the impact to the middle class, if you bring the aspect of inflation, and if you also bring the aspect of the new proposed finance bill, because one of the proposals for this bill is that the deduction for the salaries should be at least or around about 3.6%. And in this, it will actually bring a strain, considering that considering that most of our Kenyan society, or most of the Kenyan society at large, is on the classification of the middle class. So the new funding project has its benefits in terms of, like, let's say, towards the public government and towards the public universities. But if you check on how the system should occur, or how the system rather should take part, it will actually bring a more constrainous concept, especially on the second last two classification, for the less needy and also for the needy students. Because actually for the needy, for the extremely needy students and also for the vulnerable, at least they'll benefit, as Fatili has said, they'll benefit more, considering of the higher 100% funding by the government. That's my view.
Thank you for that. And sticking on you, if you don't mind, um, we've seen that obviously COOPS, they uploaded the fees for different courses on their portal for for the new students who are joining campus this year. And what the question that I have for you is that will this new funding model will it influence like the course that you choose maybe as a student going into the future? Because you can see like dentistry, which is the most expensive course now in Kenya, at around 700,000. If you see that you're part of less needy, will it influence you like to choose maybe a cheaper course?
Um, Thank you for that. Now, actually, Eric, I want to bring to your attention to how this new funding model should actually, you had tried to break down at the beginning, but now I'll bring you back again to the classifications and what the government aims. So the government, with the help of the HELP loan, is actually going to implement into the new funding model and have it in terms of, let's say, let's have a breakdown in terms of the classifications, the four categories: the vulnerable, the extremely vulnerable, the less needy, and the needy. Now, if you break down like a course, let's say Bachelor of Arts, what the government proposes is that using the 100% transition, they will pay actually 100,000. Now, this is for the vulnerable. They will actually pay 100,000, and this is left with actually 22,000 for the students to pay, and this is where now help comes into place, because the new funding project actually is trying or is rather, the government is rather trying to have the implementation of the help into the system. So the student is left to pay 22,000, whereby the help will cater for it. If you go back to the extremely needy, there'll be a payment of, like, let's say 85,000, and then the rest of the amount goes to actually the help loan to pay for it or to cater for it. Now let's go to the needy students. The needy students, actually, if you break down the loan that the government will give them, or the payment that the government will be paying, will be around approximately 64,000, and they'll get around 40 to 46,000 of the loan, or of like left for them to pay. And if you deduct such an amount, they're actually left with around 8,000 to thereabout, or 8 to 10,000. And this makes a student actually to pay around 4,000 per semester, or 4,000 or 8,000, or the 8,000 an year. And this also applies to the less needy. So the new funding project actually is a little bit on the higher aspect, or the higher end, to benefit the students and also to benefit their choices. So in particular, considering your question, or bringing back to the concept of your question, I feel on my end is that this new funding project won't extremely uh, or won't rather have an unless sorry, it won't have a negative impact to the choice a student makes, considering that also this new funding project is bringing new or more of their inclusivity using the four categorizations. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. And I'd like to bring Fadhili into the conversation, but on a different aspect. You're both student leaders at KU for Fadhili, and Pauline and UN for Pauline. So my question is, now that government is switching funds more to public universities and cutting off private universities, do you think that this will increase the quality of education in public universities? We've also seen like public universities don't have the funds to fund students' extracurricular activities. Do you think this is a step in the right direction, and it will improve the quality of education offered by public universities so that they can compete with private? Fadhili, you can take this one.
Pardon the question, please.
Oh, I was asking, the government has offered to switch to cut off private universities from funding, and these funds will be transferred to public universities. So will this improve the quality of education, and will it also improve like the quality of life in public universities, like from the hostels to extracurricular activities and clubs? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think for starters, I agree with some items that Pauline has raised. However, I have objections to some of them, but I think I will just air them out as I try to answer your question. Uh, I think definitely life will be better for people living in public universities. And I think if we were keen enough, we saw that the budgetary allocation for universities, for tertiary institutions, were actually increased. If I'm not wrong, the funding for public universities was increased from 54 to 84 billion, and the funding for TVET institutions was increased from 5.2 to 10 billion, which is also which is almost double the amount. So definitely, we're expecting life to be better. However, this problem reverts back to the categorization of people, because right now the funding that is being talked about isn't exactly directed to these universities and TVET institutions. It is directed to the individual people who are consumers of education in universities and public in universities and TVET institutions. Now, if we have a surge, or if we have people joining universities and if we have less people joining universities and TVET institutions, then
We'll try and get Fadhili back, but I'd like to throw that question to Pauline. Do you think public uh, education in public universities and TVETs will improve?
Um, Actually,
sorry.
Fadil, you can continue. I think he's back.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you can.
Oh,
Uh,
okay, I
Fadhili, are
have a
you there?
problem with my
Okay.
connectivity. Pauline, I think you should start off. Let me try and reset my connection.
Oh, Pauline, you can answer the question as we wait for Fadhili to be back.
Um, so, okay, thank you so much, Eric. Actually, on my perspective, or what I think about that question is that yes, there will be a really great improvement, especially to the public universities, considering the funding is shifting from the from the private universities into the public universities. And so what this shift has done is it has tried to actually have a balance, or actually put a balance to how the services, or to try and have the services that are offered in the public universities improved, and generally have them at par or at level with the private universities. And I'll take you back to something I had mentioned earlier, is that when we talk about the 2015 scheme, that the education that had imposed on having like trying to have a higher transition by imposing the C plus grading system as the minimum grade to join in this universities, or to join in the higher education, is that what it has done is that it has led to actually lesser parallel students, like students who are going into the education system, having them less or having less students going into this categorization. So I'll give you now to, I'll bring the aspect of its disadvantage of the new funding project to now the private universities. With this transition, it means that there are lesser students who are going into the parallel systems, and also the systems like the private universities will have lesser people having to join them since the grade is less. However, now to the public universities, the benefit is that even including this categorization, the four categories, the vulnerable, the less needy, the extremely needy, and the needy, is that the burden has shifted from the public universities, or from the burden of the public universities, and maybe into the burden of having the government take care of it through the aspect of the loans, through the aspect of the new funding proposals. And by so it actually tries to actually reduce the baggage, or the baggage of debts that the universities are having, and this greatly actually tries to improve the quality of services. Because actually, I'll take you back to some of the issues that are facing the universities that students mostly do not, or majorly do not know, is that the aspect of students failing, or when universities have lesser students paying their school fees, or lesser students coming in and to clear out their school fees, it really brings down the services that are offered in the universities, because it's from that money, like the money that the university gets. It's from it that, number one, the goes to the education, the payment of the lecturers, the facilitation of the various student activities, the facilitation for the maintenance of the school, and also the clearing of debts such as water, and also such as electricity, and so on. The list is endless. So with the funding project, having to shift from the private universities and into the public universities, because majorly actually most of the challenges that I have mentioned, or I have failed to mention, actually are more faced in the public universities than the private universities, considering also the structure to which private universities and the criteria to which private universities have. So if you have that shift, the government will try to actually pay and also help the university in terms of clearing their debts, in terms of having more students actually get to more students having to pay, because this project also, like we had mentioned, is trying to bring the aspect of inclusivity, and trying to bring the aspect of having everyone at least to fit in the four categorizations. So, in my opinion, to sum it up, is that this shift is actually more beneficial to the public universities and less beneficial to the private universities. Yes. I take it back. I think Fadili has joined the show.
Thank you, Pauline, for that answer. And before I give Fadili the chance to respond to what Pauline had said and also to state his position on this, I'd like to clarify to the audience that uh, this is not block funding. Like the government is not giving universities and TVETS like money in block. So what happens is that the student will apply for the scholarship and for the help on his own volition. So that's the funding that the government gives that particular student is the one that will be given to the public university. And now to ask the question to Fadhili, um, will this create competition uh, for public universities like to attract students? And is this a bad thing or a good thing? Because I say this because it's a bad thing because many students will not prefer to go maybe to the countryside. So will universities in the countryside and TVETs in the countryside lose out on funding and eventually like they collapse? So I think you can take it from there as you respond and answer the question.
Thank you so much, Eric, for the question. Thank you so much, Pauline, for ushering me in. I'm back like I never left. Anyway, to answer your question, I think yes, it will put public universities at an advantage so much, and it will shift the competition from between private universities and public universities. I think that's one of the objectives of the government. But I think it's a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing. When you look at the private universities that we have in the country, so many people, so many people are actually government sponsored in those private universities. Okay, in exemption of a few, a few exemptions, that is, let's say a university like Strathmore. But when you look at all these other private universities, look at African Nazarene University, look at Daystar, look at, all those private universities, they they rely so much on government funding because there are so many people out there who are government sponsored. Now, I think it's a bad thing because of exhaustion of facilities in terms of consumption and utilization. Now, when you look at a university, let's say like Kenyatta University, it boasts of tens of thousands of students, but most of the time you get that there's a drained, there's a strain on, let's say, water that is there, and you're talking with that current population that we have. The channeling of these funds doesn't entirely mean that you're going to expand all the amenities, that you're going to expand the institution. Already, public universities are overwhelmed, and these private universities are coming in to at least ensure that these other people equally access proper education. Now, I will take advantage of, let's say, the law degree. What should be done is not entirely killing private universities, but ensuring that at the end of the day, the government has something to ensure that these course requirements are properly accredited, and that they are the students that come out of there don't come out green per se. And the truth of the matter is, right now there are so many private universities that offer, a better education than some public universities that we know. So to me, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing, and I think the fact that the government will put a halt to funding of private universities is a very risky venture. Right now, there are so many people who are at the verge of graduation. There are so many people who wanted to join private universities. Now, what happens to them? I think what again we should consider is that of the 173,000 plus students who got C plus and above, a paltry 23% of these students are going to receive a full scholarship by the government, full scholarship. So what happens to the rest of these people? And you can't assure me that of these people, about 45,000 students that the government is going to cater for a bigger percent of their scholarship, that all these people are going to choose public universities, right? Because that is what the government is trying to say, that of these people who we are going to furnish their education at any stage, the vulnerable, the needy, all these people need to now choose public universities, because at the end of the day, the government isn't going to provide a shilling to private universities. I think it's basically not realistic. It's basically killing private universities. I think if the government is trying to promote equality in how we access education, it should be able to consider that private universities are also in need of some of this funding. I'm for the opinion that block funding was actually a good method of people accessing education. But now the problem comes to accountability. I think it would be easier to put in place accountability mechanisms to these institutions, to these universities and TVETs, than to bring forward an entirely new funding model that has so many loopholes. And I think the government focused on four main factors. If I may read them in verbatim, the scheme looks at the household income, the choice of the program, the affirmative performance, and government priority areas. Now, the second point is choice of the program, and that's how I was of the opinion that this entirely influences the course taken. Now, you have talked of dentistry as the most expensive course. Now, suppose I'm a needy student. I'm a middle income student, so I'm subject to getting the 53% scholarship by the government. I wanted to undertake a course in, let's say, dentistry, But now I know that after the government has accorded me the 53%, I still have to pay like 300% on my own. Suppose I'm not going to take help. I think what people are forgetting is that this help is a loan that you'll have to repay sometime after, right? So it isn't the government isn't exactly granting you money to pursue your studies. It's actually like security. You're going to return it after. So that's something that people need to put into consideration even as we are having this conversation. And it ties to the provisions of the help amendment bill. Now, if you are keen enough, one of the provisions of that amendment bill eliminated the functions of the board, now Higher Education Loans Board, to stipulate the rates for return of for the rate of interest that is supposed to be remitted back as you're repaying your loan. And I think that is a very tricky thing, and it isn't a coincidence that that provision was deliberately eliminated, and almost the same time we're having this new higher education financing model. Because right now, if the rates aren't provided by HELB, then who exactly is going to formulate the rates for HELB? Is it the executive? Are we witnessing a situation where separation of power is going to be put into jeopardy? Because if the HELB itself cannot be able to stipulate the rates of interest, who then is going to stipulate those rates of interest to be remitted back to HELB? And I think it's a very risky venture, and people need to look at it holistically, not only to look at the new funding model, but other supplementary bills that are being introduced to Parliament. We have the HELB Amendment Bill, we have the Finance Bill. All these are tied up together, and it's something that people need to witness. So yeah, it will shift, of course, competition in favor of very many public institutions. And I think very many private institutions are going to suffer. We'll have a situation where public universities are obviously overpopulated, while we have a situation where private universities are obviously underpopulated. And I think we do not want such a situation. It doesn't exactly create a balance. One of the reasons why private universities have been given leeway to promote education in Kenya is to ensure that every person access education. We're also looking at things as location. There's someone who studies in Wajir, or there's someone who wants to specifically study, let's say, theological studies in the Islam religion. That person wants to join Ummah University. But now, if you subject this person to a public university that doesn't offer some prerequisite courses, then you are limiting, what this person wants to do or to undertake in the university. And yeah, that is my humble opinion, and that's why I think that this new funding model, it's not entirely bad, but it should be given more thought and more public participation.
Thank you for that, Fadhili. Thank you for that insightful answer. And I'm going to ask a final question to you guys. I'm going to pose a final question. Uh, are you
Eric,
concerned? Yes.
sorry, Eric. If I may
Yeah.
I have a chance to add on a few things
Okay.
concerning that question before we proceed to the next question.
Okay. You may respond, but you are running out of time. So, yeah. But you may respond.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for cutting you short. But I want to put a few things Fatili has mentioned and either add on or have an entirely different perspective. Number one is that when you look at the proposals of the new of the higher education amendment bill, the 2023 bill, when you look at it in terms of the interest rate, yes, Fadili has mentioned that the duties and the mandate of the higher education board has been removed. But also, when you look at the bill, there is an extreme, or there is a notable reduction of the interest rate to which is accorded to the loans that the students or the loanee is given. And the interest has shifted from 4% to 3%, which in this shift actually is a really great beneficial, considering number one, we have the proposals of the finance bill, and number two, we have the issues of inflation. So this in turn actually helps the loanee and actually helps a student when they're going to pay when they're going to clear the loans. They are having it cleared either at a lesser rate than what they were accorded initially. So by that, it really caters for the issues of having the deduction, the inflation, and all. You won't have more burden or towards you. Number two is that this shift, actually the new higher education funding model, why is it of benefit? Is that that aspect of it shifting from private universities to public universities, what the government is actually trying to do, or what the government is trying to impose, is have this. There's always a stereotype whereby it's considered that private universities are actually better than public universities, maybe in terms of the amenities or in terms of the services, the quality services might be true, but actually it is true. But if you see the shift, actually what is trying or what is trying to propose is that the private universities and public universities at least have a balance, whereby the public universities will be benefited and they will have more, or they will try to come and have the same qualities and same services that they are trying to offer. And also, I know Fadili had mentioned that there's this aspect of majority of the students wanting to go to private universities, but also consider that there are many the rate to which public universities to private universities is that public universities are higher or are more than private universities. And also the transitioning of the students through the 2015 grading system of C plus, most of the students go to actually the public universities. And the reason as to why is that public universities has a higher range or a wider range compared to private universities. Now, I'll take you back to what I had mentioned, or something I had mentioned previously, is that public universities as of now, they're having an issue, especially in their debts, students not being able to pay, students having haven't cleared the fees, they can't pay for some of the services. Now you see, if we have this funding project, this funding model, sorry, shifted towards the public universities, as I had said before, it tries to actually curb that, then actually cap that rate of debts and the burden towards the public universities. And also, I'll take you back, Eric, to something you had mentioned about blocks. They were giving yes in terms of blocks at that time. And if you check, the block giving out had some loopholes, or actually had some disadvantages, especially when money goes to public universities or goes to universities that do not actually require the money, and lesser money going to public universities that actually need more that need actually more of this money. So the new funding project is actually trying to reduce, or actually trying to curb such an issue, by having the money or the funding accorded in terms of who is the right person, or who is the right which the right university to have this money being accorded to them. And then lastly, I'll take you back to something about the health loan, which is actually being incorporated into the new funding model, into the funding project. When you look at when health started in 1974, the rate to which they were given their money was from 35,000 to 65,000. But due to the progressive inflation, due to changes, the rates actually ranges from 38,000 to 75,000. Why have I mentioned this? Now I'll take you back to the proposals of this funding project. Like I said before, it has four categories: the vulnerable, the less vulnerable, the vulnerable, the less needy, the extremely needy, and the needy. Whereby the first two, the vulnerable and the extremely vulnerable, have the 100% rate, and the government catering for them at about 100, and then the 38% going to the students. And then we have the not 38, and then the other percentage actually going to the students. And then we have the vulnerable, the needy, and now the less needy at 93%. When you look at that, and when you look at one of the things I had mentioned, or one of the categorization, let's say like bachelor of arts, having been catered for 100,000 and left at 22,000. If you come to the help loan, where they're giving at a range of 35,000 to 38,000 to 75,000, when a student actually applies for that loan and they're given, like, let's say a range of 40,000 depending, and you see the government has funded 100,000, this leaves only about like 22,000 to the students. Um, and when they have that help loan and when they try to clear it, this will actually leave some amount to the students. Why have I brought that aspect? I'm bringing this aspect because if you look at all this and what we've been trying to talk about, this funding project is actually beneficial because it actually tries to include and actually tries to bring lesser discrimination. If you unlike the other funding project that used to occur in terms of blocks, because even if you look at some of the disadvantages of those some of the disadvantages of the other previous funding project is that one of the disadvantages was it was more discriminatory, because actually funding was going to the universities and not to the students. Number two is it was actually less excluding, less including. It had lesser inclusion. So by doing so, and by the virtue of this funding project, reducing the block funding to actually funding the students is on aspect of having this lesser discrimination, and also an aspect of bringing about accountability. So in my opinion, or to sum it up because of time, I feel like the impact, or rather what this new higher education funding model will do is that, number one, yes, I'll concur with Fatili. It will reduce competition between private universities and public universities, and also try to cap the stereotype of how private universities offer more or benefits than public universities. And number two, it will really be beneficial for the public universities, considering the public universities will try to have try to have more, or try to have a balance of having in terms of how they offer their services. And lastly, it will reduce the issues of funding going to universities that actually do not require that fund, and going to the universities that actually require this fund, because of the virtue that this fund is actually going to the students and not to the university. Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry for taking time.
It's okay. Thank you, Pauline, for that insightful answer. And I'd like to ask for your final thoughts. 1 minute each. Actually, let me just pose a question so that you can answer in one word. Is the new education funding model good or bad for students? Fadhili, one word answer, please, due to time.
Yeah, definitely it's bad. Can I explain it? Kidogo tu. You've said 1 minute, I'll take the 1 minute.
1 minute, please.
Yeah, it's bad, first of all, because it's so unclear on the allocation of who exactly. Yes. It's bad because it's first of all unclear on the allocation of who will be termed as vulnerable and who will be termed as able. Secondly, it tends to punish the people who are considered actually able and rich. It's like you're being punished for working hard.
I think we've lost Fadhili. Pauline, one word answer. Is it good or bad for students?
What I can say is that in everything there is always a pro and there's always a con for something.
Yeah.
So in this new funding project, it actually has middle-aged kind of answer. So there is an yes with some benefits and there's a no with lesser benefits. Why am I saying this? Is because number one, on aspect of this
Uh,
sorry, I'll just explain a little bit.
Pauline,
Number one,
okay.
there's this.
Please take 1 minute, please. I'm sorry to cut
Okay,
you
okay,
short. It's
okay. Thank you.
because the time. Yeah. Please take 1 minute.
Yeah, I understand. I quite understand. So the new funding project will actually be beneficial to the students, considering the issue of more inclusivity and having more categorization of having vulnerable people, lesser needy, and extremely needy. And also, if it, I've taking you back to the new finance bill on proposal of having the inclusion of the youth and also the inclusion of persons with disability and the criteria to which this new funding project will use. They're having the social background check, the affirmative action, which includes people with disabilities, orphans, the household, and the previous school type. This all this and bring into the aspect of the help loan increment and the deduction and the reduction of the interest rate from 4% to 3%. It's actually good for the students. Why is it bad? It's bad, or why am I saying it's bad? It's bad in the aspect that the help loan actually has been incorporated to the issue of paying the fees. Like the help loan is no longer a grant in the new funding project. And for students actually need more than actually the fees. Yes, I've paid the fees, but I need issues like accommodation. Where will I stay? Issues of food. And this is where the help actually and other loans were actually coming into place and helping the students. But when you see when in this new funding project, the proposal has created that the help is no longer a grant. By so this is actually going to be detrimental to the students in terms of other facilitating or having them to facilitate for other personal needs or the needs they require. But actually, yeah, that's what I
Okay.
can say. Sum it up.
Okay. Thank you, Pauline, for that answer, and also thank you for your participation in this forum. And also, I'd like to thank Fadhili for participating in absentia. He has network issues. Um, and I'd like to thank the audience for tuning in and listening to this important conversation. The beauty of this platform is that the youth get to have their say on what affects them. And so I'd like all of you to like the video, share the video, and subscribe to Speak Up Africa. And I wish we had more time because there's a lot to say on this. We haven't even touched on the health bill, but that's a conversation for another day. Thank you for your participation, everyone, and see you next time.